More than a century after the Tulsa Race Massacre, when Black Wall Street was devastated, the land where that neighborhood once thrived is again at the center of Tulsa's story. For decades, the 56 acres that make up the Kirkpatrick Heights and Greenwood area have been defined by stalled redevelopment efforts, public distrust, and the lingering effects of urban renewal. But today, that same land has become the foundation for something new, a community-led plan to restore not just property, but power. The Kirkpatrick Heights Greenwood Master Plan is Tulsa's boldest step yet towards reconciliation. It's the product of years of organizing, listening, and visioning, shaped by the people of North Tulsa and the city's commitment to do things differently. In this episode, I speak with Ashley Philippsen and Dr. Lana Turner-Addison, who co-chaired the leadership committee that guided the master plan. Ashley is the executive director of Impact Tulsa, where she's helped shape equitable growth strategies across the region. Dr. Turner-Addison is a lifelong North Tulsa resident, educator, and advocate who has served as president of the Tulsa Public Schools Board. Together, they bring deep roots and shared purpose to the work of rebuilding trust through community-driven planning. We explore what it takes to navigate history and hold multiple perspectives, all while centering healing, ownership, and accountability. I'm Kate Gasparo, and this is Building Better Cities. You have had a very close connection to Kirkpatrick Heights, Greenwood, for quite some time. For our listeners who don't know much about North Tulsa and these neighborhoods, I would love for you to provide some background. It's been more than a century after the destruction of Black Wall Street, and the master plan takes into account that history and the decades of disinvestment and displacement in North Tulsa. How did Partner Tulsa and the leadership committee approach this plan as a tool for healing, restoration, and community empowerment, not just redevelopment?
When the land or when the acres were given back to the city of Tulsa, there was much concern over community fear, community distrust of the city. We had just had an eminent domain scare in 2019 where lots of residents, over 100 homes, were concerned the city would once again use urban renewal to displace. So that political context is important, but also understanding the city's intent to want to get it right. So as a tool for healing, restoration, and community empowerment, the city was marching towards the 100th anniversary of the centennial. You had people who had been laboring in the community for years at the fact that this university land trust didn't develop the land and people hadn't seen redevelopment. So it was important coming out of that eminent domain context to both educate the community. What does urban development look like in a way that is future focused, that is dense, that is multifaceted, so multiple people can benefit the land, was an approach from the city side. And then also, how does the community benefit was the looming question that went into the RFP for the firm that would actually help us lead the master planning.
I know we knew that any new development had to address the history of disinvestment and displacement in North Tulsa. So that's why I believe we made sure the process was community-led just from the beginning.
You spoke a little bit about the University Center at Tulsa. I think it's referred to as UCAT, sort of having this chapter of redevelopment vision prior to the master plan. Can you talk about what led to that transition from UCAT's redevelopment vision to now the master plan vision?
So the inception of UCAT, of course, predates my living in Tulsa, but there was this idea that they were going to build this major university center. There's plans for housing and, just an overestimation of the amount of students that they could attract, which led to underdevelopment. There were no apartments built. There was not an expansion of the university. So the 56 acres is what was given back to the city of Tulsa and Tulsa Development Authority, because I believe it was 30 years of, we'll wait and see if things are going to be developed. The city pushed for, and the Tulsa Development Authority commissioners at the time pushed for, let's get that land back and develop it for the city of Tulsa. If you look at downtown, only swath of land that is not developed. So there was probably also, just some interest from developers and businesses alike, what's going to happen to this bit of real estate, which is why it was so important for us to have strict guardrails in place so that it was not just doled out to somebody who would have developed it immediately, because it is prime real estate.
You talk about how this master plan is community driven and really that starts with its leadership. So, can you talk about how the leadership committee was formed, your role in that, and how you set up those guardrails to ensure that this was going to be a community driven plan?
Well, for me, it started when the former mayor identified 11 members in our community who were actually doing a lot of community advocacy, doing real-time work, trying to uplift our community, those with diverse backgrounds, whether it's business owners, civic, residents, faith-based, and even municipal government and city council representatives. But it was people who truly have been probably for decades working and on the ground. So we came together, and that's how the leadership committee was initially formed. And from there, we had ground rules that we had to follow, and there was a decision made on how we move forward with trying to ensure that we had oversight over how this 56 acres of land would be developed, which means we shepherd the project from beginning to voting on the plan by city council and TDA. But what's important to me is that the group of people who were at the table, they were all Black residents of North Tulsa, of the community that we're talking about. And they brought diverse perspectives. And, there were challenges, but there were more opportunities that help us continue to move things forward. WRT was a consultant that was retained, and part of our responsibility is holding them accountable to the work as well, to moving things forward so we can get to a plan that was, I referred to it as the community plan, the Kirkpatrick High School Master Plan.
Okay, I can also just add on to that, especially if looking at this as a blueprint for developing with residents. I think it was very interesting that Dr. Turner-Addison mentioned like diverse perspectives. When you think about factions across the community, we pulled from different factions so that it was not always an agreement or a consensus or convergence. And I think that really allowed us to dig deep and work within our networks and across our networks. But the perspectives definitely, everyone is not in agreement. I think that makes for a healthy process and a truly democratic process by ensuring diversity of perspective.
Yes. And the plan actually makes note of over 1,000 community touch points. Yes, that's a lot of work. So from pop-ups and youth workshops to small group charrettes, what were some of the most effective ways you found to bring new voices into the process?
As an educator, it was important that young people are there. We think about people who have the privilege of time. You often see folks 50 and over in these spaces. We arranged with school leaders to be in middle schools and high schools connected to the property. So we met people where they were, right? The designers were very adept at this very tactical or tactile kinesthetic activity for young people to imagine and construct what they wanted. So the charrettes were very hands-on. And then I'll just also speak to one of my other favorites is some people don't have an hour and a half or 2 hours to sit at a meeting to talk to us, but they can talk with us on their way in or out of the grocery store. So again, this place-based, high touch, high traffic area is where people were able to give their feedback. And then the other thing that was important, because, this is probably in every city, but in ours, you'll have a leadership committee, but things will stick with those 12 people. Well, we are multitude. So multiple ways to give feedback, whether you're in person in a meeting, you're in present for a charrette, you're at the grocery store. There was also a static feedback portal on the website so that people could give their 2 cents that way. So creating multiple pathways for input, but also a place to get updates if you're not able to be there.
Well, I would add to the neighborhood associations. That was one opportunity that I took advantage of and helping get this word out and listening sessions that we had. In addition, there was an opportunity to receive oral history, even from our elders and things like that. I think that strengthened the total outcome of what was included in the plan.
That's interesting, especially with so many touch points and so many different mediums in which you're bringing in community voice. How did you realize that the plan itself was complete, that it was ready to go to the board? What were some of the goals that you had set out that you accomplished through this process that you felt, okay, now we're ready to present this as a complete package?
Well, I believe we were ready because it was a transparent process. OurLegacyTulsa.org was the website used to track our progress and to have a timeline out there. And then when we got to a point of all this input and all these opportunities, we actually had a big community meeting, which was held at OSU Tulsa, which sits in the front footprint as well, and allowed people to actually review the draft plan and make comments before we actually sent it to get ready to be approved by Tulsa Development Authority and the city of Tulsa. So people really felt it like it was their plan, so they bought into it, and we created just so many opportunities for them to continue to buy into it before it was submitted, even toward the end. I provide their feedback, not just buy in, but they saw that some of the things that they were recommending, many of the things they were recommending were included in the plan. I think that's how we knew we were ready. We got a good consensus here.
Yeah. I would also say, just practically, if you notice the frequency of meetings, there was not a huge lag where people are like, wait, what do we talk about? WRT was very consistent with being very deliberate in pulling quotes, using photographs to cite, hey, we're not coming up with this on our own. This is born by, with, and for the people in this area.
When a plan like this comes together, there are some communities that are better at it than others, where it feels like the planning is done to the community instead of with the community. And I'm curious, what were some of the principles, Dr. Turner-Addison, you added that there were some elements of the plan that the community actually saw become more tangible when they read through the plan. Can you speak to those principles that reflect the community vision, and maybe not just the principles, but the actual elements of the plan that reflected the engagement you had done?
I would say, this plan and the land we're talking about sits in a historical area of Greenwood. So for them, people have this personal touch and feel of the plan. So when they start seeing elements of the plan that talked about building intergenerational wealth for community, for Black residents, for the other areas, and when they saw that we could take ownership in the, have access to opportunities to actually be part of the development and ownership and those types of things, the committees and commissions continually influence it. Housing and business retail and some of those other things were very important. The young people were really talked about, even pop-ups and trucks and vendors and place making and just all types of activities. So I think when people saw that we actually listened and that their feedback was incorporated in the document in a way that they can receive it, I see it, because so often people talk over people's head, particularly our residents, our community, and they're not understanding what's really going on. So the opportunity that we created through charrettes allowed them to have that voice and see that their voice can translate. One of the things I continue to tell people is that your voice matters. So many people in our community don't believe that, and they have reason to not believe that because of trust. Trust is something that you earn. And I think we were deliberate about making sure we earned that trust, that we incorporate what those voices were saying and were respectful.
Another tool I would like to add or introduce into this for folks listening who might be thinking about doing this in their context, there is a tool, there's a couple of iterations, but basically community engagement spectrum. And it's very important whenever we're asking for community engagement, we are very explicit on what is going to be a point of input, what is something to co-develop, what is something that you're totally going to own, and really worked with the consultants and the city staff when I transitioned off of city staff to be a community volunteer with Dr. Turner-Addison. What are we willing to work together on, and what is not? What is not an option? For example, if it comes to certain zoning limitations or infrastructure underground, people do well with managed expectations and boundaries. So that was also very important. The organization of the process from beginning to end, where we understood we will be giving input. This ultimately lives with the mayor, or this ultimately lives with whomever. I also think that contributed to a trustworthy process where people did not feel like their time was wasted or their decisions were not actually decisions. There was no artifice or like a sham of ownership, but we really tried to stand behind, this is what a decision lies with you all, and this is where it doesn't.
I love the framework of expectation setting. Was there lessons learned along the way that had you think about adapting your process or adapting the community's expectations about what this community plan, master plan was going to be?
So one thing I would say, I've been a kind of steady, I wouldn't say broken record, but a steady record The word community has a lot of connotations depending on what do you mean when you say community, right? So we have a very rich history in Tulsa. The parcel is located on Cherokee land, introducing that concept of ownership and rights, and the fact that Black residents were displaced, the fact that Greenwood was burned down and rebuilt. When I say it's a lesson learned, it is a conversation dynamic. What does that mean when we say Black ownership, restitution or restoration to the Black community who's also on Cherokee land? And what does that mean as the Cherokee Nation looks to occupying its space? So when I say a lesson learned is the layers of community and the expanding and contracting of community is a conversation that we still continue to have. And I think it's important, but it is an understanding of this broad table of folks who've been displaced in different ways, and something that we're going to have to continue to think through as this master planning process unfolds. But in terms of lessons learned, I think this is a model, and it's shown to be a model of how municipalities can partner with communities. Being organized is very important, having a clear line of sight to where are we headed so that we can know what our yeses and our nos and our maybes mean. Thinking about the lesson learned, like the changing of an administration, or what happens when you have the master plan and now you have to get to your intent of this community development corporation. So those are some lessons we're actively living out right now.
I would agree. And I would just add that the other thing is that we need to over communicate, just always keep that communication at the front and use various tools to do that.
There's so many different aspects to that. And it seems what's really coming through is this idea that the process has to hold multitudes, that there are many different perspectives, not just of this time, but over the legacy of this land that needs to come to play here. I would like to pivot now and sort of make the bridge from the master plan to the establishment of this community development corporation and what it looks like to put legs to a vision. So when we think about the broken promises of urban renewal, not just in North Tulsa, but across many communities in the country, it's really important to not just set those expectations, but follow them through. So what was the expectation coming out of the master plan for these next steps? And in this period where there isn't as much intense engagement, what has it been like in transition?
So after the master planning process, we had about 3 months, 6 months of community, larger stakeholders, so 40 folks. So the leadership committee, and then a larger swath of folks representing different sectors, residents, and so forth came together to think through what is the best model. They went on these site visits, they came back and reported. So it was a really intense and city-funded process to learn from best cases or best practices across the country. And there are 34 of us by the end, and 31 of us decided that a CDC is the best model based on the aspirations of this group to lead, the work that a CDC does. And from there, it became less of a let's do community input to let's be doing the grunt work of bylaws. Let's do the work of understanding what our structures are. And the group, I'll let Dr. Turner-Addison speak to the engagement there, but following up with the community has been the next step. I will say that transitions with leadership are some things that I didn't plan around. And that would be like a lesson learned what to do when the leader of the EDC and then the second leader of the EDC transition out and the mayor transitions out. But despite those shifts, I would say we're still on track with our work and engagement.
That's such an important question. And honestly, it's something we talked about a lot as a team. We knew that trust wouldn't just happen overnight, especially given the history here. For me, some real turning points came when we started publishing feedback. This was related to the pop-up events and workshops. And folks could actually see how their input was shaping decision. As we move forward to the Community Governance Working Group, which is what Ashley talked about, which is a 34 plus members, they were charged with important decisions on what is the next step. The next step will involve standing up an organization that could acquire the 56 acres of land, that could be accountable to ensuring that we implemented the Kirkpatrick Heights Greenwood Master Plan, the People's Plan. But, the trust wasn't always just immediate. It was tested. There were times when some resident challengers showed real accountability and wanted to know where we were. at a certain point. So one of the things we're trying to really do better right now is the Greenwood Legacy CDC, which has been stood up and has been formed. And so this is something new. We'll have a web presence soon, but we have community-wide meetings in which everybody can attend. So moments in this process and turning points they're still occurring. And one of the things our community is asking us is when we're going to expand our board, which is our next step. We're getting ready to hire an executive director. So it's just a lot of big moments as we set up to our next phase of ensuring that we have the pathway to acquire the 56-acre land and have the capacity to do the implementation components working alongside TDA and the municipal government and partner Tulsa.
So the CDC has been in place for a year now. You have bylaws in place, and you're about to select an ED, an executive director for the CDC. So as this transition continues to be carried out, I love the web presence, even the continuation of the community meetings. How are you ensuring that new leadership inherits not just the structure of the CDC, but also the accountability mechanisms, Dr. Turner-Addison, that you referred to, so that they remain legitimate, resourced, and trusted by the community?
The Community Governance Work Group is the group that actually voted to stand up a CDC. We just recently had the Community Governance Working Group. We invited them to meet via Zoom with our top candidate. We'll continue to do that throughout the process. We're looking at standing up an elder council, which is something that the Kirkpatrick Price Greenwood Master Plan had asked us to do, and some other subcommittees and council groups. And that has been influenced by what individuals. So there's going to be all types of ongoing touch points. And the plan is to have quarterly community meetings, even as the executive director is coming on board. And we want the executive director to be a part of how we build out the rest of this engagement. But this is a community-led and driven process, which is an element we're not going to take out of the process.
From a Tulsa Development Authority standpoint, it's very important whenever people set up a grassroots initiative that people are set up for success. So the technical support of the Partner Tulsa team, the infrastructure that they have is very important to support the CDC becoming its own 501c3, setting up its accounts, but also the due diligence that an economic development organization can provide when it comes to, managing land acquisition, managing land development and things like that. So I think that's also an important commitment from the city of Tulsa and Partner Tulsa as well, to set the CDC up for success and also stay in its lane. Like, the CDC is an independent entity, and I've tried to stress that in a lot of community meetings, because of course, from some folks, like, doubt or misbelief, or it really isn't an independent entity. I'm like, yes, it is. So I think that's also why the community meetings are important to distinguish the CDC from Partner Tulsa, from Tulsa Development Authority.
Can you speak a little bit about that dynamic? And we've talked about Partner Tulsa, the TDA. Could you talk through, like, who are the big players here and the dynamics of them, especially as we see the CDC stand up as an independent organization?
Yeah, so the CDC is its own independent organization. Tulsa Development Authority is the urban renewal authority for Tulsa and has been since the model cities in the 60s. So the land was given to Tulsa Development Authority. The city of Tulsa used tax dollars, the 2.5 Envision dollars, to help stand up this work. And this is what's helping fund. And those funds were given to TDA to give to the CDC as it stands up its entity and manages land. Partner Tulsa is the evolution of 5 authorities of the city of Tulsa, which are not important for this podcast, but for layman's terms, people might understand it as an economic development corporation. So Partner Tulsa is legally named the Tulsa Authority for Economic Opportunity and manages lots of development in our community. As a commissioner and the chair of Tulsa Development Authority, we're also trustees for the Tulsa Authority for Economic Opportunity. They're the ones that manage business attraction and land development. So Tulsa Development Authority commissioners rely on the staff of Partner Tulsa to do the day-to-day work of supporting Dr. Lana Turner-Addison and the rest of the board of the Greenwood Legacy CDC. 3 entities, the CDC, the Tulsa Development Authority, and the Partner Tulsa staff
Thank you.
Thanks for laying that all out. Yes.
I would just add that we are in the phase with the CDC where we're in the incubation to implementation. So we rely on partner Tulsa staff support while we're in this incubation period.
And then you're talking about how the community wants to ensure that the CDC is independent. And is that for any particular reason? Are there entrenched opinions or perspectives from TDA or Partner Tulsa that they'd like to see the CDC stand apart from?
Yeah, you don't want the illusion of independence, and there's still like city control. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Turner-Addison, through the master planning process of what does it look like? What does community ownership look like?
Mhm.
What does, not only the pride that comes from this land, coming back into the hands of community, but also having decision making is very important. So that is why, and also just for like best practices, there are things that government should manage, and there's things that community-based organizations can manage. And this is Tulsa's opportunity to demonstrate that.
There are two parties that we've been mostly talking about: government agencies and the community and its many facets. There's also the developer community. Can you speak about that third party, how they've been engaged with government and community through this process? And has there been tension that you've seen, or maybe resolution through the process to get developers to understand community's intent for the future plans here?
Yeah, so I
Ashley.
mentioned that RFP when we first started. I sat down with not just community members, not just elected officials, not just longtime advocates, but I also sat down with developers, right? Here's what we're trying to do. What is it that you would need to develop? Because you can't have economic development without developers. They played a part in both giving their perspective and also listening to my perspective as an approximate resident. I live nearby this development, and also sharing the concerns. They helped me understand the technical needs, like what attracts a developer to develop. What is the balance of commercial versus residential? What is their willingness to work with folks and step back or step in? So developers played a part in the formation of the RFP. They came to our community meetings. We saw lots of developers participating in the charrettes and the design process, but it was very helpful to educate not only our team, but the public on what are those conditions needed to really benefit the community. Again, there's a whole aspect of community benefit here. Economic development, that was important to get insights from developers.
Ashley, you explained that we had a local developer who was even a part of our community governance working group, and we had another local development who was initially a part of our advisory committee who stood up our CDC.
Yeah, I forgot to mention Brandon Jackson is a developer on our committee. He was very helpful, I would say, in a voice.
Yes.
When I say reason, it's helpful to have to temper our expectations on what's feasible,
Right.
the cost of materials, the fluctuating things. I would say an essential pragmatic perspective in a room with folks who aren't developers.
As we're sort of wrapping up here, I like how we're tying together the expectation setting, the tempering of expectations, and the cyclical process that comes from that. And so as the CDC is being established, as the new leadership is coming in, how do we make sure that urban renewal becomes community restoration that will help this plan be a success in the long run?
I believe that shifting the narrative from urban renewal, which too often meant displacement and loss and gentrification, and urban removal, which has often been referred to here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to community restoration, changes the lens in a fundamental way. It emphasizes healing, honoring history, and building something that truly belongs to the people who live here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. That's the foundation that we're giving, particularly as it relates to the Greenwood Legacy Corporation CDC work. This new community development corporation, as chair, I am committed to preserving not just the name, but legitimacy, resources, and the genuine interest in our residents.
I would also just add what I want people to locally and nationally to understand about this process is one of the phrases we adopted early in this process is urgency is the enemy of equity. You can also think about urgency as the enemy of inclusion. We get this land back. It would have been so easy for the mayor at the time to say, all right, so let's get this land ready and get it sold off, right? Because
Right.
about needing to make money, needing to act fast. And we have had to balance that. There's been lots of people, what's happening, what's going on. And Like I said, this was both an educational process, a visioning process, a technical process, and the appetite for endurance is very important. You cannot have community restoration without some patience for the timing that it takes to expand that table, expand the perspectives there. So that's one thing I'd like folks to understand. And then two, from a community standpoint, this is but one way of community restoration. When, break ground and this is happening, we have miles to go before we sleep. We have lots of other environmental things. When I say like this, the things that impact how people wake up and live every day. So we look at this as a beacon that this work can be done. What else is done once we have land developed? It would be my challenge to myself, to our commissioners, and to the city that we work and live in every day.
And I'm just thinking of the national headlines that we see these days, and the work that you started around the centennial was in a different place and time than we are now. And I'm curious how that might have influenced this transition, or how you're using vocabulary around the master plan and enticing investment to redevelop in the principles of the community plan.
I say for me, I have been a little more intentional about the vocabulary, and only because of the space we're in, because we're going to continue the work, but we can change our vernacular and still accomplish what we're trying to accomplish for our community for redevelopment. So we don't have to continue to say the steps to nowhere.
I would just say the thing that whenever you're dealing with multiple people, multiple perspectives, avoiding the danger of or and embracing the power of and. Like scarcity mentality is a threat to this type of work. And really just trying to socialize this idea of and so that we're all beneficiaries of this opportunity we have.
I just ask the people who are part of this type of work just stay engaged. I always ask questions and show up, and share their ideals and hold those in leadership or with responsibilities, hold them accountable for implementation of working alongside and collaborating with organizations to ensure the best outcomes for community. Sometimes you have to have the courage to do this work, to move things forward and work alongside with each other. Outside of that, sometimes individuals tend to just not believe anything positive can happen. It hasn't happened yet. So it takes a little bit of courage too.
Thanks for tuning in to Building Better Cities. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to hit subscribe so you never miss another episode. And if you could help spread the word by sharing with someone, it would mean so much to us. To learn more about our work, check out buildingbettercities.com. We're excited to keep the conversation going. So until next time, let's keep building better cities together.